Hello and welcome to KLM Institute.
Today, we have some breaking news that's bound to stir up a lot of conversation. Former President Donald Trump has decided to withdraw the United States from the Paris Climate Agreement once again. This move marks the beginning of a new chapter in global climate politics, and we're going to dive into everything you need to know about it. The Paris Agreement, why Trump is making this decision, and what the implications could be for the future. So, let's start with the Paris Agreement itself. This landmark international treaty was signed in December 2015 during the United Nations Climate Change Conference, known as COP21, held in Paris. The main goal of the agreement is to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius, preferably to 1.5 degrees Celsius, compared to pre-industrial levels. Countries all over the world signed on, agreeing to take steps to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, with the ultimate aim of curbing the devastating effects of climate change. The Paris Agreement stands out because it's a voluntary framework. Unlike past global climate agreements, which imposed rigid emissions targets, this one allows each country to set its own goals and decide how to meet them. This flexibility has made it easier for countries, including major emitters like the United States and China, to commit to taking action. However, it also means that the success of the agreement depends on whether nations actually follow through with their pledges and continue to ramp up their efforts over time. Now, fast forward to today. Former President Trump, who was outspoken about his skepticism of the Paris Agreement during his first term, has made it clear that he's pulling the U.S. out once again.
Could you imagine Biden doing this? I don't think so. I don't think so.
The next item here is the withdrawal from the Paris Climate Treaty. Yes, sir. We're going to save over $1 trillion by withdrawing from that treaty. Is a directive to the federal government ending the weaponization of government against the political adversaries of the previous administration, as we've seen.
Back in 2017, Trump made headlines by announcing that he was withdrawing from the deal, arguing that it was unfair to the American economy. He claimed that the accord placed burdens on U.S. industries, costing jobs and hindering economic growth, while other nations, particularly China, were not being held to the same standards. His position has remained largely unchanged since then, and now, just after taking office again, he's reaffirming his commitment to exit the agreement. Trump signed an order in front of his supporters at the Capital One Arena, declaring the Paris Climate Accord a rip-off that would not be in the U.S.'s best interest. The United States will not sabotage our own industries while China pollutes with impunity, he remarked, a statement that clearly resonated with his audience. While China is the world's largest emitter of greenhouse gases, it's also leading the way in renewable energy development. But what exactly does it mean for the U.S. to withdraw from the Paris Agreement? Well, the formal process is a little more complicated than just signing a document. The U.S. has to send a formal notice to the United Nations, and the exit doesn't take effect immediately. In fact, the withdrawal process takes about a year, and once the U.S. officially exits, it will no longer be bound by the accord's commitments. This move raises a lot of questions about the future of climate action in the U.S. and its role on the global stage. Critics of Trump's decision argue that it will have serious consequences. Environmental groups, like the Union of Concerned Scientists, have pointed out that climate change is not just a distant threat, it's already here. We're seeing the impacts every year with devastating heatwaves, destructive wildfires, intense storms, and rising sea levels. If the U.S. pulls out of the Paris Agreement, it could slow down global progress on addressing these issues and give other countries an excuse to scale back their efforts as well. In fact, just last year, the world experienced the hottest year on record, and major events like hurricanes, floods, and wildfires have been wreaking havoc across the globe. The increasing frequency and intensity of these events are clear signs that climate change is accelerating, and we need more coordinated global action, not less. With the U.S. being the second largest emitter of greenhouse gases after China, its participation in the Paris Agreement is crucial for achieving the target of limiting global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Another key concern is the U.S.'s role in the global clean energy market. By withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, the U.S. could find itself sidelined in the growing green technology sector, which includes clean energy, electric vehicles, and renewable energy innovations. The U.S. would miss out on the opportunity to lead in these areas, which are expected to be critical for future economic growth. Moreover, the decision to withdraw could also weaken the country's leverage in international negotiations. Global climate action is a collective effort, and countries that take strong action can push others to do the same. If the U.S. is no longer involved in the Paris Agreement, it risks losing its ability to influence other nations and guide global climate policy in a direction that aligns with its interests. Let's not forget that this decision is not entirely unexpected. During his campaign, Trump made it clear that he would revisit the U.S.'s participation in the Paris Agreement if he won another term in office. Now that he's following through on that promise. However, this time, the withdrawal could be quicker and more straightforward, with Trump's administration taking immediate steps to revoke Biden-era climate policies and promote fossil fuel industries. One of the first things Trump did after taking office was declare a national energy emergency, a move that he claims will prioritize domestic energy production. This includes revoking several key environmental regulations from the Biden administration, such as limits on emissions from coal and gas-fired power plants and new fees on methane emissions. He also signed an order pausing new wind power projects on federal lands, which directly impacts renewable energy development. So, what will be the overall impact of this decision? First, it's important to understand that the U.S. rejoined the Paris Agreement in 2021 under President Joe Biden, after Trump's withdrawal. The U.S. had set ambitious targets to cut greenhouse gas emissions by more than 60% by 2035. Those goals, however, are now in jeopardy. Trump's withdrawal could undo a lot of the progress that had been made during Biden's time in office, making it harder to meet future climate targets. But despite the challenges posed by a U.S. exit, international climate action has proven resilient. Countries around the world are continuing to push forward on their own climate goals, even without the U.S. at the table. Lawrence Tubiana, the CEO of the European Climate Foundation, reminded us that global climate action is bigger than any single country's politics or policies. So, in the end, while Trump's decision to withdraw from the Paris Agreement is certainly significant, it doesn't spell the end of global efforts to combat climate change. The world is facing an urgent crisis, and while the U.S. may be taking a step back, many other countries are doubling down on their climate commitments. The question remains, though, will the U.S. return to the fold, or will this be the beginning of a new era of climate politics with less emphasis on global cooperation? That's something we'll all be watching closely in the years to come. Thanks for joining us here at KLM Institute, and stay tuned for more updates on this evolving story.